Hey guys, welcome to this Ruby introduction tutorial. We are going to cover the absolute basics of Ruby programming. Now, if you do have some experience, you might want to skip this tutorial and maybe go to one of my Rails or JavaScript ones because you might get bored. Otherwise, just follow along. So I will assume a few things for this tutorial. First of all, of course, that you have Ruby installed, and in my description I will put a link to tutorials how to install it. It's super easy, especially if you're on a Mac, so no worries. If you do have some issues, you can just text me on Instagram and I can help you out. I will also assume that you have Visual Code Studio installed, so it doesn't need to be Visual Code, but it might be better because it's also just easier to have the same interface while you're following along with this tutorial. So, quick note about Ruby. Ruby is an object-oriented programming language, and we will cover that in another video. So what is OOP? But mainly what you need to know is Ruby is a high-level end programming language, and it can pretty much do anything. So it's not a very popular language. Many people think it's dying, which might be understandable because it's not the most popular, but it is not dying, guys, and it's very, very common among startups, especially because Ruby is very famous for his framework called Ruby on Rails, which I have some tutorials about as well. And basically, Rails allows you to boost your development speed. You can build web apps in no time at all, but it is not the only thing that you can do with Ruby, of course. You can build besides web apps, you can build apps, you can build desktop apps, you can even build games with Ruby. It's absolutely amazing. So let's go ahead and get into the basics of Ruby. So let's open up Visual Code. Great. I even already have my terminal open, but let's close that for now. So we just want to open up a new file because this is where we're going to be working from, of course. We need to write the code somewhere. And now the very first thing we want to do, of course, as in any new programming language you will learn, is printing out hello world, printing out our first sentence, our first string, as you will learn it in a bit, on the terminal. So in Ruby, it's very simple to do that. You simply write print and then you give it whatever you want to print. It's that easy. So we can go ahead and write print hello world. Now there is another way to actually print out something on the terminal, and it is called puts. And I will tell you the difference between puts and print. It is very simple. Let me just zoom a little bit so that you guys can see better. So the difference between print and puts is almost nothing. The only difference is that puts returns a line. So if you would write print hello world and then print hello world again, they would go on the same line right next to each other, while if you write puts hello world and then puts hello world, they would go below each other. That's the only difference. So great, so now we want to see that on our terminal, right? We want to see our beautiful code here, the program that we just wrote. So we can save that file, and the way you save it is you simply save it as a .rb extension, which stands for Ruby, of course. So let's call this one our hello world.rb. And I will save it on my desktop because it's easier. Great. Look, by doing that, we get nice colors because Visual Code understands that it's Ruby. Now we want to open up our terminal, which we closed before. So you can go here in terminal, new terminal, or you can use the shortcut. And so how do we actually run that amazing program that we just wrote? So it's very simple. If you have Ruby installed, Ruby will expect you to just specify that you're running a Ruby file by saying Ruby and then what file you want to run. So now you don't need to have experience on how to use a terminal, but it would help a little bit so that you understand the logic behind this. I might do a tutorial further on. but basically we just want to give in the path to that file. So since we are already in desktop here, we just want to give the name of the file, hello world. And you can see that we printed out hello world. Now, why is it going together? I did say that puts returns a line, but puts returns a line after. So if we would actually do that, oops. So if we would actually do that and rerun our file, so if you do arrow up, it just gives you the command from before. You can see that hello world then goes below. Amazing, guys. We just wrote our first program. Doesn't do much, but it's a program. We told it to do something, we ran it, and it did it. This is how programming works. So now let's jump ahead on, there's three main things that I want to cover in this video. If we have time, we will go through more, but might not also be a good idea to overwhelm with concepts. So the first one is variables. Now, what is a variable? I will open Paintbrush and show you my design skills because it's just easier. Let's open a new document. Great. Now, what is Paintbrush? Sorry. What is a variable? So a variable, you need to think of it like a box. Okay? And what do you do with a box? Well, usually you label that box, right? So you write something from outside. So for example, that box would be called my age. Okay, so I know I have a box, my age, but when I open that box, there's nothing inside, right? So I actually want to keep something inside, data, when it comes to programming. And in the case of my age, what I want to keep is my age. So I am 22 years old, almost 23. So I keep 22 inside of my age box. What does it mean? That every time I open this box, I see 22. Unless I change whatever is inside, right? Next year, I'll change the box content with 23. Very abstract. So let's maybe go ahead and create our first variable because it is the most important thing in programming. There is no programming without variables. Now the syntax for declaring a variable in Ruby is so simple. You just write the name of the variable you want. So in that case, we'll take the same example and we'll call it my age. And we set it equal to something. So what do we want to set it equal to? Let's again take the same example and set it to 22. And that is it. Now we created our first variable, our first box, which contains the number 22. Great. So what happens now? What do we do? Why did we want to do this? Why not just like write 22 whenever we want? Well, the thing is, declaring variables will allow you to use them further on and change their value, but also in case of a real world example would be if you have a user and you store his data inside of a variable and it increments based on actions or based on events, right? So let's go ahead, for example, and you can see that if you print this out, so instead of just printing 22, now every time you will open that box, so every time you will call that variable, you will just get whatever is inside. So let's run that to see what happens. So what happens when we try to print my age and we get 22, right? And what you can do, what is awesome with variables, which takes us to the next step, is that variables accept every data type, right? So first of all, it even accepts operations. So you can say that this variable is equal to my age plus 1, right? And if you print my age after that, you can see that now my age is 23, okay? So what are the data types in Ruby? Now we have several ones. The most important ones, or the most common ones, are that you're going to see most of the time are strings. So strings are simply what we did before when we printed hello world. Now this is a string, something that goes inside quotes. Okay, so just think of it as text because that's what it is. Then we have the integers, which is what we just covered, so numbers. Very simple. We also have something called booleans. And what are booleans? So booleans are simply true or false values, right? So for example, you could have a variable called I don't know, adult, am I an adult? And it returns true or false based on a simple calculation or something that you set. Then we have arrays. Arrays, a little bit more complicated, but not complicated yet. Arrays are a data type that basically takes many small values inside, so at indexes. So it can take, for example, 22, it can take 23, it can even take a string. And the funny thing about arrays is one array can even contain another array with other things. Now I understand that it's very hard, you might get confused by what the hell is this and what do we even do with it, but don't worry, because it always did like this, especially at least with me when I was first learning programming and I was introduced to arrays and hashes, and I was like, what do I even do with this? Like you're showing me, in what case would I use something like this? But it makes so much sense once you get into real world examples and you start doing stuff. It just makes so much sense. So give it some time, guys, and don't worry about it. For now, I'm just introducing you to the data types. So these are arrays, and of course you can also assign them to variables. So my age could hold this array. And now let's just have a look at what happens when you actually print this array. So because it's a little bit different. So yes, equal to my array. And when you print it, of course, you get the array. So that doesn't change. But the thing is, what if I just want this value or this value or this value? So the way to do that in arrays is actually calling it by its index. So arrays have indexes and they start at 0. You might have seen this somewhere before, but basically if I want to get the first one, well, the first one is not 1, but it's actually 0. The second one is 1, 2, and 3. So if I want to get the first value of my array, I can just give it the index like this, right? And here it basically gives you whichever one. So by doing that, I'm telling it, hey, go inside of this array and just give me back the value at the index of 0, which is 22. And you can see that if we print it out, we get 22. Great. Now, another data type, which is a little bit more complicated, so we won't really cover it today, is hashes. Now, hashes look like this, and they take a key and a pair. And now when you call this hash and you tell it, hey, return me the name, I will get Hassan. Works a little bit the same way as arrays, but instead of indexing them with zeros, 0, 1, 2, 3, it's with keys, right? Which you determine actually. Great, and one last one is symbols. Just so you don't get confused by the syntax, this is called a symbol. Actually, this is called a symbol. Okay, and we also will not cover this today. Great. Sorry for the confusion. Just wanted to introduce the data types so that we can go further with the next step, which is conditions, right? Another major thing in programming, which will allow you to do something, perform a set of actions based on the result, and it is conditions. Now, how do conditions work? Super simple. Basically, if something happens, right? And so if this happens, I want you to perform a certain code. Otherwise, I want you to perform another code. It's that simple. And you finish it with end. Now this here, if, else, end, is Ruby syntax, right? In other programming languages, you wouldn't write it like this, but in Ruby, you write it like this. Now, what does it mean exactly? Because this doesn't make any sense at all. So what I'm telling the code is, for example, if my age is equal to 22, then, for example, we can print, you can go to Vegas. Otherwise, if it's not equal to 22, we want to print, you cannot go to Vegas, little man. Let's not print the little man, but you get the idea, right? Now, if we want to try out this code, we just need to declare the variable because this doesn't exist anymore because we removed it. So let's set my age to 22 and run the program. And you can see that the if-else statement, so the condition, goes and it checks. So is my age equal to 22? It is. It's true. So we will execute this. But if my age was not equal to 22, you can see that we cannot go to Vegas. Now the statement doesn't really make sense because 21 you can still go to Vegas, but also if my age was 23 we would still be able to go to Vegas, right? This is just judging if the age is equal to 22. But the idea behind it is what we want to focus on, is that you just give it a condition, right? And if it's true, if the condition is true, we execute the code here. Otherwise, we will execute another code. So, for example, think of in the real world. So, for example, if you're trying to log into your account, right, and you enter a password, and if the password is your password, we will let you inside of your account. Otherwise, we'll tell you, hey, it's a wrong password. This is how conditions work, and they are used everywhere. There is no program that doesn't use conditions. Okay, I might be wrong, but I really doubt it. Cool, we just covered conditions. Now, before just jumping around and doing some more fun programs, the last one is, maybe let's look a little bit more into operations, because I realized that we skipped that part. So we have my age, I said before, so let's set my age equal to 18. I am young again. So what we want to do, for example, when you do conditions or when you do math operations, is in programming, so you can see that equal doesn't mean that we are doing an operation, right? We are not checking if this is equal to this. In programming, when you check if something is equal to something else, you do two equals, right? So my age equal 18 would return true or false, right? Like, is my age equal to 18? And it is the case, so it is true. So this returns true. Now, if you want to check if something is not equal to something else, you just use the bang. So my age does not equal 18. That would return false because my age does equal 18. Now, what if we want to check if my age is bigger than 18? Now that would return false, right? But what we can do, for example, if it's an adult website for casino, let's say, let's not get bad here. So we would, for example, say like people are allowed to go into the casinos online if they're 18, let's assume. So if they are 18, we want to allow them, right? We don't only want to allow them if they are above 18. So we would say is bigger or equal to 18, right? And that would return true unless you are 17. And you can basically do the same thing with smaller or equal to. So you can do my age is smaller or equal to. Great. Now we have the equal, we have the bigger than, we have the less than, we have the not equal to. So these are some of the operations you will see the most when using conditions. Okay, and so basically with that we can already start by writing some basic logic, right? So for example, let's assume we want to allow someone inside of a nightclub only if he is above 18. So we have my age set here. I will remove this. So if my age is bigger or is equal to 18, then I am allowed in the club. You can go in the club. Otherwise, sorry, you are too young. Great, and this is our first logical program. Ruby is going to evaluate this, go ahead and execute it. And we can see that we can go in the club because we are 18. But let's be 17 for a second. And unfortunately we are too young. But what happens if a year passes and my age changes here? And what we are going to do here is a variable reassignment, which is also very common. So based on an action, here we are assuming that 1 year passed and my age changes. So reassigning something, a variable, can be done in different ways. So you can simply say that my age is equal to 18 now, right? And now my age would be equal to 18. What you can also do is basically increment it, right? And incrementing this by 1. So now we say my age plus equals 1. So it takes the variable's value from before, 17, and it adds 1 to it. And now we are 18. So let's actually run that and see if that worked. We would expect to get you can go in the club because our age was incremented. And now we can go in the club because 1 year passed and we are 18. Woohoo, let's go party. Awesome. Now, these are how conditions work, how variable incrementation works. And just with that, you can actually already build some fun stuff. But I'm sure you've already heard of these concepts. I just wanted to freshen them up. Now I want to show you some stuff that you can do already with the built-in Ruby methods, so functions that Ruby already has that you can call on data types, on variables or anything that you have inside of your program. And for example, one of them being, let me think, so you can find those functions. First of all, let me maybe mention that you can find them on the Ruby documentation. And there is a lot of websites and you can find pretty much anything you want. You just need to know how to search for it. So if we would say Ruby docs integer, and we want to know how to play with an integer or what we can do on an integer maybe, and you can see that there's a lot of methods here that you can do. So one of them that I could show you, for example, that it might be useful is odd. And there is here, so let's use that one. Let's create a variable called my number and set it to 2. And then we want to know if this number is odd or even. So is this number odd? Is this number even? And you can see that odd returns false, because the number is not odd, right? Odd would be 1, 3, etc. I don't need to teach you that. But it returns true when it's even because 2 is an even number. Now, you see how I just used a method that I didn't even write this, right? This is not code that I wrote. It exists on the Ruby language, and it was built by other people, and you can just use it, right? And this is absolutely amazing because sometimes you might find yourself writing a program and writing a function that does something while it already exists actually, and you can just use a real one from the Ruby language itself, right? So another fun one is actually generating random numbers, and this will actually allow us to build a little fun game to end this tutorial. So we are going to build a game where you basically have to guess the number, and as long as you didn't guess the number, we just keep asking for it. And this introduces us to a concept called loops in programming. So loops is basically a condition, works the same way as a condition, and as long as the condition is not met, right, we will just keep running it. So let's say as long as the number we are trying to guess is not correct, we will keep asking for the number. So let me show you the syntax, for example, one of the syntax, because there are several ways to write loops. So the easiest one is the while loop. So while my age doesn't equal 18, we want to print you can't go in, right, to keep the same example. My age doesn't exist, so we need to initialize it. So let's set my age equal to 12 at that time. Now what would happen? The loop would go and would check, okay, so how much is my age? It's 12. Does it equal 18? No, it does not equal 18. So I will print this. And then it would go back. And it would do the same thing. How much is my age? 12. Does it equal 18? It does not. And it prints this. Now, you might have seen a problem with this little loop here, is that there's no way to actually stop that loop, right? Running this is called an infinite loop. And basically, your program would just keep running and running and running and running, and it would not stop until you end the program. And this is really bad because it causes your computer to freeze. So what we want to do here is actually give it a condition when it can, like, give it a way to exit, right? So you can, there's keywords for that, keyword called break, which allows you to break from a loop based on a condition. But what we want to do here is actually what we saw before, so reassigning the variable, right? So every time we run the loop, we want to increment the age. So we run the loop the first time, right? And my age is 12, it doesn't equal 18. It prints this, and then it increases the age by 1. So now age is 13. And so it's going to run again, and it's going to check my age, and now it's 13. And it's going to say, but it's still not equal to 18. And it's going to run it and run it until my age will be equal to 18. So let's try that out. Let's use puts. And you can see that you can't go in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times because it was only equal to 8 after 6 times of incrementation, right? But did you realize how fast it went, right? Like how fast the computer evaluated this and just printed it out on our screen. And this is why computers are amazing. So let me show you actually another example. So let's say this is my age and it's 0, and we want my age to be equal to 1000, right? And as long as it's not equal to 1000, we just want to put my age. We want to print my age on the screen as long as it's not equal to 1000. And now let's run this. And look how fast the computer went to just printing out 1000 numbers. It literally took like 1 second. And it printed out 1000. It evaluated it and printed it. And this is the beauty of programming. So now let's do something useful with it. That might be a little already too advanced, so feel free to just pause it around, go back, text me on Instagram if you still have doubts about anything. But I think it's just fun if we actually build something. So here's what we want to build. We want to build a game that basically asks the user to guess a number, right? The number that's, like, guess the number, let's say, because the computer will choose a number at first, and we have to guess it, right? And the user enters a guess, and if it is not correct, we ask again. That if it is correct, we print a nice message. So this is what we want to reproduce. Okay, so so I already know some of the methods that we are going to use in here that are built in from Ruby. The way that I found them is just by Googling around, right? So you Google, for example, for that first one is how to take input from a user, so how to prompt on the terminal. And the way to do that is chomp. So Ruby has this keyword method called chomp. So for example, if we start and we print guess the number, or sorry, what is your name? And then so we use gets.chomp, but in addition to using gets.chomp, we are storing it somewhere so that after we actually enter our name, we want to print welcome. Probably forgot to mention that very basic concept, which is called concatenation. So putting two strings together with just the plus sign. So you can put strings together by using the operations, but you cannot do a string plus a number. That does not work. You would get an error. So this is called concatenation, but you might have seen it before. So let's try that out and see if it works. Oops, forgot to save. That usually helps. So it's asking me what is my name. My name is Hassan, and it says welcome Hassan. Obviously we're missing a space here. I could even do it like this, but you get the idea, right? So now we are turning our program into a dynamic one. That is awesome. So let's start with our little game here. So what is your name is not what we want to ask. We want to say, hey, guess what number I have. Let's do that as a put so that it goes, returns a line. And we store the variable, whatever we enter inside of a variable called guess, right? So the computer will ask us what number does he have. We will give it a guess. But the computer doesn't have a number right now, right? So we need to give it a random number when the program starts. And another built-in Ruby method from this is called rand. So computer number, let's set a variable equal to a random number. And to get a random number, you just use this method from Ruby, which stands for random, and you give it a range, right? So between what number and what number do you want it to choose a random one? So we could put, for example, from 1 to 100, and Ruby would just pick one number between those, right? So it could be 98, it could be 74, it could be 44. But if we would do a game with 100 cases, that might be too hard to guess and might take too long for the user to guess. So let's just start it off with like 5 or even 4, my favorite number, and ask the user to guess the number. All right, and so we got the guess, but then we need to do something. So we want to put something, but we don't always want to print the same message, right? We only want to print a congratulations message if he guesses it right, otherwise try again. So this is when our if-else condition comes in, right? So if the guess from the user is equal to the computer number, then we actually want to say, congratulations, you are a genius. Otherwise, we just want to ask the user to try again. And that seems nicer, right? No? So let's see what happens. And let's take it step by step. So right now we are here, line 7. Guess what number I have? And this is what's printed here. And now you can see that it's prompting something and ready to store it inside of a variable. So my guess is 3, right? I hit enter, and then the if-else gets evaluated. So I hit enter, it stored in a variable, and it checked. And unfortunately my guess was wrong. So it did not execute this line, but it executed this line. Try again. But the problem is that the program ended. So we don't want the program to end because we're going to run it again, and then the computer is going to choose another number, and not nice. So we just want to keep running the same program until we guess it right. And this is where our loop is going to come in. So as long as the guess doesn't equal the computer number, so as long as the guess doesn't equal the computer number, we basically just want to run this program. Okay, so we start. So while the guess doesn't equal the computer number, we just print out try again. And oops. And we will prompt the user again. And if we exit the loop here, it means that the user guessed it right. And in that case, we can put congratulations, you are a genius. And let's maybe print the number. The number was computer number. Okay, so let's try that out. So get number what I have. 2, not correct. 3, not correct. 4, 5, 1. Okay, now what is happening? Because I tried every number, right? I even tried more than the numbers we had, but it's still not correct. And I want to show you what is happening. So let's actually print that out. We want to print, when it says try again, we want to print the guess, and we want to print the computer number. And let's see if that actually tells us what is happening. It doesn't really tell us what is happening, so I know why. So there's two ways to maybe find out what is happening. This is called debugging, of course. So one way would be to basically find out what data type is your number, right? This is what we want to find out eventually. And there's two ways of doing it. So there's a Ruby built-in method, which is just basically calling class on a variable or on an object that you have, and it will just tell you whether it's an integer, whether it's a string, etc. But more easy is just writing p, and p prints out the data type as well. Like, so if it's an array, it will print it out as an array. So let's just do p, exit the program. You exit the program, by the way, by doing Control C, and run it again. So let's guess a number. And now we see what is happening, right? I'm guessing 4. And then I see that it's printing my 4 in quotes. So it turned my 4 into a string. But the number from the computer is not a string, it's actually a number. So even if now I would enter 1, 1 as a string does not equal 1 as a number. And this is something very important to know, is that you cannot, just the same way that you cannot add up a number to a string, you cannot compare them because they're not the same thing. So 1 in quotes does not equal 1 without quotes. And the way to turn our number into an integer is basically just doing that. This is a built-in method from Ruby, which turns a string to an integer. It's as simple as that. So now if we try it, if we run the same program to see that it worked, guess what number I have? 2. Congratulations, you are a genius. Okay, I see. Here we are trying to concatenate a number to a string. So we can use a way to do that. Don't stress about it, just to make it pretty. It's called interpolation. And interpolation basically is this, right? So here Ruby is expecting something else than a string, and it will just include it inside of the string. Right, and so if we run it again, 1, 2, the number was 2. Great, so let's remove this. Gets confusing. Sorry, I'll run it one last time. 1, nope, try again. 3, 4, congratulations, you are a genius, the number was 4. Amazing, guys, we just built our first super basic game, right? So this is the exact same logic, well, not the exact same logic, but it is the same logic as writing a quiz. You could write a quiz with this logic here. So let's just go over it one last time, and then I promise I'll let you leave. It's not like I'm holding you against your will, am I? So what are we doing? We start the program by creating a variable, computer number, and assigning it a random number, right, between 1 and 4. Now, computer number is whatever number was generated randomly. So we don't even know what it is. Us, as the programmers, we don't even know what it is unless we print it out. And then we print out a message asking the user for his input, right? We're asking him to type in something. And we take whatever he types, we turn it into an integer because it comes as a string, so we get it as an integer with this method, and we store it inside a variable. So now every time we get guess, we call guess, we get whatever the user entered on his screen. And then we start the loop. So quick thing here. Why did we do this outside of the loop? And it's very simple, because if we would have this piece of line, this line of code here inside of the loop, then every time we run the loop, a new number gets generated, and then it's even harder to guess the number, right? It's not really fair. We want the number to get generated once at the beginning of the program, the user guesses it, and then when you run the program again, it's a different number. But you don't want it to run every time the loop is running, right? Because otherwise, the user would enter a guess. Let's say the number is 4, but he enters 2, it's wrong, and then the computer would generate a new number, let's say 3, and then it doesn't really make sense. So the loop checks if the input from the user is equal to the computer number, and if it's not equal, so as long as it is not equal to it, we ask the user to try again. If it is equal, we don't run this loop, and we simply print, "Congratulations, you are a genius." Now, something you need to understand with programming is it reads, right, the lines in order unless you tell it not to. But so it goes to line number 2, okay, it executes it, and then it goes to line number 3, it executes it, 4, 6, and then it comes here, and on 6 it will only execute it, of course, if the guess doesn't equal the computer number, and otherwise it goes to line 11, executes it, line 12 executes it, right? So super cool, guys. I really hope this wasn't too much or wasn't too boring, and if you guys like it, just let me know on Instagram, because this is usually where I decide what tutorials I'll make. And the reason I decided to make this one here is because I had a poll on my story and asked if you guys are developers, and even though the majority knew already how to code, there were still a few hundred that did not. And I thought just not really cool for you guys to follow me without knowing what is happening. So there you go, first introduction. And if you like it, let me know on Instagram, and we can take it maybe a step further and start writing methods. And methods are something that you will see everywhere. Functions is basically like, for example, wrapping this piece of code inside of a block and then being able to call it at any time. So if you like it, let me know. We'll make cooler videos with cooler little programs like this. Thank you so much, guys. Leave a like, subscribe, and follow me on Instagram.